What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. Before we get into today's conversation with Dan Klitsner, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. Number one, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider leaving a positive rating and review. The more positive ratings and reviews you get, the more it helps people find the show. And it really helps to grow the community that we're developing. And if you're one of those people that have recently found the podcast, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. I put out brand new interviews every single Monday, and brand new takeaways episodes is an audio exclusive where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week every single Thursday. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it to your Instagram story, tag myself at Jacob Kelly, tag Dan and at Bop It Inventor, and I'll feature you on my account and send you a message as well. And now, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Dan Klitsner. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. And today on the podcast, we are joined by Dan Klitsner. Dan is the founder and creative director of toy inventing and licensing firm KID Group LLC. He has created 3 number one toys, including one of the world's most popular toys, the Bop It. On top of that, he is the recipient of 2 Gold Idea Awards and 4 Toy of the Year Awards. And I'm very excited to have him here on the podcast today. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jacob. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. And where I want to start today, I want to go all the way back to the beginning. And can you talk to me about growing up in Walnut Creek?
At the time I grew up there were walnuts and creeks. Going to school there, I went all the way from elementary through high school, and it was pretty much a straightforward education, but not necessarily in arts and design, as much as I went into later. But it was I tinkered a lot with lots of little mechanisms, growing up. I had a Heath kit, if people know what that is. Do you know what a Heath kit is?
I believe I Googled it in preparation for this podcast. So, I would, if you can explain a little bit to the listener and kind of refresh me as well, that'd be awesome.
Well, I'll give a couple of things that are really funny about that. Is I started out wanting to kind of always wanted to draw things, create things, tinker with things. And I had a friend across the street who was much more in the electronic-y things, and I was more into the physical things, like how things looked. And he was more into the mechanisms. But he got me into this thing called the Heath kit. At the time, it was like this big board where you could connect wires together and light bulbs and things. And, kind of like an invention kit where you could show you how to make a door alarm or how to make, a radio and things where you connect the resistors and things and like with little springs on it. So it was very easy to do. I'm sure there's some version of it around today. So that was my first sort of feeling like I really like creating or, inventing with things like that. What's ironic about it is at the time, and then I'd take apart things like toy robots and lawnmowers. I took a lot of stuff apart and put it back together in another form, which is pretty much what I've done for the last 30 years. A lot of they just sort of take old stuff apart and make it into new stuff.
Yeah. And from my understanding, family game nights are pretty common at your house, right? Like that was something you guys did pretty often?
Yeah, I think that, what really got me to pick this as a career eventually really goes back to the feeling that when you play a game with someone and when your family plays games together, it's really one of the most bonding moments and memorable moments that people have. When I've given talks and I ask people, what is the most memorable moment of your childhood? If you had a few of them, what were you doing with your parents? And I have a few theories on that, just, that it's the one time when you're able to, you've all agreed, it's like an agreement not to take each other too seriously, not to have an agenda other than we're here just to be with each other and play together. That's, it's really a significant state of mind. And that's definitely affected me. I think I'm always on the search for what's the next experience that someone will talk about that says they remember it from their youth as a really memorable experience.
I want to talk about going to college as well, because you didn't initially go for game design or anything like that. You went for industrial design, as far as I'm aware. And from my understanding, you wanted to design things like sleek toasters and teapots. But when you graduated, you realized that that wasn't really an option. So you got another job, right?
Yeah, I think I started in industrial design, started in engineering and didn't like it at all. Going back to the Heathkit thing, I was more interested in what the thing looked like than the nuts and bolts of really how it worked. So luckily, my father had found out about this school called Art Center where there was this field called industrial design, which I didn't even know existed when I was in high school, when I was in first 2 years of college. And when I opened up the brochure to say, what is this about? Because, of course, your parents tell you to do something like, oh, I don't really want to do that. I opened it up and I just went, that's it. That's what I want to do. And it was probably, I still remember, student projects like probably toasters and weird objects. And I didn't know people designed those. There were cars. It's a big car design school. I knew people were car designers. I really just never thought about it, that someone designed that chair or that lamp or that toaster or blender. And at the time, starting to look and see these really cool looking objects and saying, I want to design those things. I was intrigued by the way the the ergonomics. Like, I really like things that people touch and how something operates and how is it ergonomic, but as well as what does it look like sitting in your house. That really intrigued me.
And you ended up designing the bottle, the toilet cleaner bottle with the crooked neck, right?
Yeah, I think there was a few of them out at the time. For what I've looked back, I don't think I was the first to do that. I think a lot of things were evolving in that direction, and Clorox was a client of. I kind of worked for a company called Landor as a freelancer. They were a graphic identity firm, and Clorox was one of their clients. And they asked them to work on their new identity and new bottle. And when I came in, I designed that bottle, one with a crooked neck. There were also projects like the Woodford Reserve bourbon bottle that's still around today, the Hornitos tequila bottle, Corbett Canyon wine bottle. I was sort of, for these different companies in San Francisco, I was their freelance, industrial designer doing these projects because they were primarily doing the graphics.
Mhm. It was through your freelance work that you ended up getting into the toy industry, right? With Discovery Toys.
That's right. I answered an ad in the newspaper for industrial designer needed for a local toy company. And Discovery Toys is a company that, here I have something here, specialized in rattles and things that moms would sell in their home to other moms, like a Tupperware party, mostly. And they were just doing imported stuff, and they wanted an industrial designer to design their own products. So this was one of the first things I designed for them. It was a little rattle, looks like an elephant. Of course, the rattle part, I put peanuts in the stomach because everyone knows that elephants eat peanuts. So even though the baby doesn't know the difference, this type of design to me was sort of like a cartoon where the parents get the joke, even though the kid doesn't. But part of the design, the purpose of design is the people who might not even be using it, but the people observing it. So I did maybe 6 or 7 products for them in a couple of years, and that got me interested in toys.
And then, so for anyone that doesn't know, can you kind of explain how the toy industry would work? So, like, for example, you create the design and then you license it to a bigger company and then they create the product and sell it and you get royalties. Am I kind of simplifying it too much? Can you just explain a little bit how the industry works?
That is a nutshell version of it. There's so many variations and ways people do different deals, in this kind of field. Um, my journey from there was, yeah, at the time I had different freelance clients. I had Memorex, which is an electronics company that had hired me to do remote controls, and these were universal remote controls that you could use on any TV, and at the same time I was working on some toy ideas, and it did inspire me to think of how could I do remotes for kids. But that's jumping ahead just a little bit. I think we're going to come to that. But what I say is I had I had these bottle clients. I had different industrial design clients. The toys were just one of my industrial design clients. And there was one product I was designing. They wanted to do something with digging, and for sand toys, and I came up with this idea for a sand digger that you dig in the sand using ergonomically, fitting your hand in it. And the idea that it could be this very soft one piece thing, very different, just from observing kids like wanting to dig. It's more fun to dig like this. I love being at the beach myself and digging in the sand without scraping your fingernails. And they didn't want to do it. And so at the time, I had heard that in the toy industry specifically, that companies would license ideas from designers, inventors, and you could get a royalty on it. So I started to look into that. And this was my first product that I attempted to licensed it to a small company in the Midwest. I don't think either of us knew what we were quite doing. They hadn't licensed something before, and I hadn't licensed to someone before. So, although I got paid some royalties on it, it was very exciting to pitch something and get paid. They didn't do the patent, and I didn't do the patent. I think both of us thought the other was going to do it, and it ended up getting knocked off. And yet that's why you see these all over the world now, is because it got knocked off so much and it was so successful that 30 years later, there's probably millions of these that have been done. So I'm kind of okay with that being a learning experience, even though I don't make money on it anymore. I'm kind of proud that the first thing I licensed has lasted and is all over the world. It's I call it shareware.
Mm-hmm. No kidding. That's impressive. And then correct me if I'm wrong, but the first game you licensed was called Go-Go Worms, right?
Yes, that was first game. I'd licensed some other products. Go-Go Worms is a game that you extrude Play-Doh out in parallel worms that try to race each other, kind of in slow motion. And that's an important part of I had come up with a lot of ideas that were sort of like a three-dimensional, more industrial designed products and pitched them. And I know, back to your question though, how does the toy industry work? Those ideas primarily, you can do them as sketches. You can pitch an idea as a sketch to a company. And toy companies in particular are very open. They have inventor relations departments that are specifically, most of them do, or the big ones do, that are there to scout out new ideas. And they'll, it used to be maybe more, you could just have a really great idea on a board and pitch it. Today, they pretty much want videos that show off the product. Even if it's not a working product, it has to be pretty close to something that can be made. And if you pitch an idea to a company and they want to buy it, there's usually a grace period of a few weeks where they can decide. After that, you try to get them to option the idea, which is where they put money down to hold it exclusively, so you don't pitch it or license it to someone else. And after that, if they could evaluate it and say, no, we've decided not to do it, you would keep the money that they paid you as an option, as sort of the fact that they took it off the market for that time. And then you could go option it to someone else. And a lot of people have optioned the same idea to probably 3 or 4 companies, made a little money on it, even if it never got made. These ideas don't usually have to be patented. They're often it's a lot of good faith in some ways in that industry, where you're pitching ideas to people you have long-term relationships with, and you're doing your best, to find a good match of your idea for the right company. So that's often a question about patenting that people ask.
Mm-hmm. My next question before we kind of get into remote out of controls is, so your first game was Go-Go Worms. Your second game was Gum Guys, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of your early games, and even like kind of just showing where your career has gone, a lot of your stuff has been getting the person that's using your creation to move themselves. The toy's not moving them, they're moving the toy. And so I'm curious how kind of your background in industrial design has influenced your inventing over the course of your career.
Yeah, that's my. I said there's a motto of watch the kid, not the toy. Watch the player, not the game. Like, if you really want to see if something's a good experience, pretend you're not watching just watch what's the person doing while they're playing with this thing. even a deck of cards, right? It's just a deck of cards. But if you watch people while they play cards, think about poker. It's one of the most interactive games ever, or any game, because you're looking at the people. That game makes the people animate. I said it animates the people in a certain way. Their eyes, the nature of them throwing a card down, picking a card up. There's a lot of activity that happens around a good game, and that, from the industrial design background, I suppose it's just being interested in the tactile nature of things, meaning how a thing feels, how you interact with it. The user experience is all from an industrial design background, as well as the aesthetic of what it looks like. But rather than a product just looking like something to look at, it should invite you to do something to it. A great design, you can kind of tell how it works just by looking at it. And that's a way of that's a very interactive thing, that you can imagine yourself using something just by looking at it. And that often that's a physical interaction rather than a thing you just push with your thumbs, a set of buttons that you have to kind of figure out. I like things that sort of create motion in the user just by interacting with them.
And speaking of creating motion, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the remote out of controls. Now, you kind of alluded to it earlier. I know one of them specifically, which was the hammer, really invoked motion to kind of get you to change the channel. So can you explain a little bit about the idea behind remote out of controls?
Yeah, as I said earlier, this never would have happened. There's a lot of reasons why Bop It never would have happened, and a lot of them are just these flukes and things that, part of the creative process is just listening a lot and watching a lot, even if you have an intention for something to, on one hand, say be very intent on it and on doing whatever it is you set out to do, and on the other hand, be very, very good at changing, to another direction if something better comes along. There's sort of two things at the same time. So I was working on remote controls for this company, Memorex, for adults. At the same time, I was starting, right around the time of Go-Go Worms and this, I was starting to pitch ideas to toy companies to license those. So I had consulting, the design work is paid consulting hours. I'm not inventing or licensing. I'm just being paid as consultant. It's kind of the opposite of coming up with ideas and trying to pitch them. But while working on the remotes, I thought, what about a remote control just for kids that was more toy-like and that made them move? The secret, to me, I was interested in remote controls, but very interested in this idea of, because when you watch someone use a remote, it's I'm just pushing buttons on something. So the inspiration came up of, what about a remote that you shake or this or do something with, something active, a little more fun. And that was this idea of a hammer that you bang on the table for channel up, the other direction, channel down. Volume was a twist, and pull for on off. So these are literally thinking, what's the most physical way you could interact with a remote control? So that channel, of course, today with all of those 600 channels, it's kind of hard to imagine yourself doing that. But at the time, maybe 20 channels, banging on a table to change the channel, make your remote control into a toy, but a working remote. And so that was one of these ideas that I was interested in pitching, along with this whole concept of remotes out of control, which were crazy other themed remotes. This one in particular, a slice of pizza that, the pepperoni and the different things on the pizza were buttons. So it was more of a joke, because you would leave it on your coffee table and it would be like, what's that piece of pizza doing there? Oh, that's my remote control. It was just silly ideas, a couch potato, a surfer, a channel surfer, a surfboard. And a company did license the idea of remotes out of control. And some people, when I've been on social media, say they actually had one or still have one. And I had not known they were even produced, to be honest. And out of that, the hammer remote was not used. It was too unconventional, because it was hard to explain what this was, so the company didn't do it. And that is sort of what led to, if that hadn't happened, Bop It never would have happened, as I think but I don't know if I'm jumping ahead. Tell me what you want to talk about.
My next question in terms of the channel bopper, I believe it was a meeting with Parker Brothers where someone said to you, maybe it's not a remote. And I've heard you talk about this concept of relentless listening. And so I'm curious if you kind of explain that applied specifically to the channel bopper and how you took that feedback of maybe it's not a remote and how you spun that into the idea for Bop It.
Yeah, this concept of relentless listening is the word I really like for any entrepreneur and inventor who, as I said, be passionate about your idea. I had this idea like pitching, okay, I really still like this idea of a remote control that you bang on the table. And I pitched it at a meeting to Parker Brothers. And really believed in it, that it would have sounds and really talking about it. I'm so focused on it being a remote. And at the time, the Tom, the guy across the table who I knew, he said, maybe it's not a remote. And the first impression when someone tells you that is to say, yeah, you're not understanding my idea. It's a remote and it's good. And it's, I'm going to be passionate about it. And that's it. I believe in my idea. But relentless listening is when you take extra effort to really get into what is it that, okay, someone just offered me some free, counterpoint to my thinking, and to stop and really let it sink in and sort of like, what do you mean by that? And he goes, I don't know, maybe just because remotes, it's a different market. Maybe it's a toy of some kind, with no idea that what it would do. There was no Bop It, Twist It, Pull It at the time. It was simply just, maybe that thing isn't a remote.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of letting that sit.
And so it was taking that feedback that led to Bop It. And I'm curious, how do you determine, even today, when someone's giving you advice or giving you their opinion on a product you're pitching, how do you determine when something is an idea worth pursuing or when it's worth pivoting the idea?
Well, I don't know. Except that it's awfully, you're awfully fortunate when you're right in making that decision. Like I said in the beginning, the biggest quandary is sometimes, I think sometimes you have a vision, of some kind. You have to follow it. You have to believe in it. You're listening to enough people who you respect to vet out, is this a good idea? Or is this just my own, am I off on a tangent somewhere? And it's really who you're talking to that matters about your ideas. That not that they have to be an expert, just that you have to have maybe a cross section of people to understand, to test out a little bit. Am I just the only one who thinks it's a great idea? It's also that even if your idea is a good idea, it doesn't mean it can't be better. And who to listen to and how to listen is sort of being the own editor of your vision. Nothing ever, I don't think there's, probably any invention that started out exactly as it ended up. It always had iterations. And having the ability to really decide whether that improvement or that suggestion is really better or takes you in a new direction is and there's no one way to say it, except that if you don't listen, I'm pretty sure you won't succeed. If you really just shut everyone out, whether you should take all the advice or some of the advice, that's the process.
Mm-hmm. And so, eventually in the case of the channel bopper, you turn it into Bop It and you take the advice, you turn it into a game. And I want to ask about one specific meeting. And it was the meeting you had with Bill Dorman from Milton Bradley. From my understanding, that was the first pitch meeting you've ever been flown into.
I actually flew myself there.
Okay.
Yeah, but correct statement. I was flown to the meeting by myself. Yes. So how Bop It, maybe for those who haven't heard the rest of the story, how Bop It, went from a remote control to a suggestion of maybe it's not a remote to maybe it's a game to Bop It was the fact that another company had called me and said they were looking for ideas for new handheld games, meaning LCD games with screens in them. And because this was a rejected, failed, thing sitting on my desk, I saw it and thought, oh, that physical thing I'm trying to do, maybe LCD games should be more physical. Maybe it is a game. And the idea in my head of Tom saying maybe it's not a remote, I just like, well, okay, maybe it's a game. I mean, he thought maybe he meant it was a toy, or it wasn't like anyone had an idea. It was just planting the idea in my head. So testing it out, thinking of it as a game, went through all sorts of other ideas. Does it have a screen on it? Is it a game where you're building things? It's a hammer, until it was sort of settled into this idea of a game that just tells you what to do and you do it. It says bop, you're bopping it to change channels. Instead, it just tells you to bop it, you bop it. It tells you to twist it, you twist it. It tells you to pull it. How those things happen, I don't know. You just, it's through trying to listen and work. And at some point I thought, well, maybe this is a game that just tells you what to do and you do it. But feeling like it should have been memory, like Simon, it should tell you 4 things to do and you have to remember what order. And I tried a lot of these things and they didn't feel very fun. And the one thing in this process that, in terms of just thinking, creative thinking in general, and how do you know when the idea is the right idea, is just by experiencing it and feeling it and saying, yeah, that's possible. That's an idea. You could do it like the game Simon, but it's just not very fun, And it could have lights in it, which I tried, but it just didn't feel right. And this one moment of thinking, what if it just did 1 command at a time instead of 4 that you had to remember? What if it, because it's kind of like patting your head and rubbing your tummy, it felt like there was something about experiencing it with a physical model that felt like it would be maybe kind of confusing and funny to have to keep up with a thing that was giving you instructions that had a beat to it. This whole kind of thing started to evolve. And so after testing it, I thought, yeah, I think it's just 1 command at a time and it just gets faster. So that was a pretty big leap from starting as a remote control that you decide when to hit it to change channels and turn the volume, to the device telling you what to do, animating you. And so it's controlling you instead of you controlling it. So it's really the opposite of how it started. Now jumping ahead to it being one of maybe 10 ideas that I wanted to pitch to Parker Brothers. And that Bill Dorman was the head of their marketing inventor sort of relations department. I hadn't met with him personally before. Because of Go-Go Worms, because of the success of previous things, it built the relationship so that they had called me, and one of the guy who worked for him had called me and said, Bill's going to be in California, but he's going to be in LA. But if you want to fly down there from San Francisco to meet with him, he says he'd like to have a meeting with you because of your success so far. And it just happened in that meeting. I had a few things, and I really wanted a relationship with him directly. So, he said, "Oh, I don't think I'll be able to get up to San Francisco." I said, "Don't worry, I'll come down to LA." It was the first time I flew somewhere for a meeting like this. They usually came to town and you'd pitch them stuff. So in this particular case, I found out what hotel he was going to be at. I said, well, I'd like to stay at the same hotel so I can set things up in my room so that I can just pitch them to you. And it isn't like if you're trying to pitch a lot of ideas, they have to watch you take it out of the box and set it up. Like it's a lot of time is wasted. So to do a good pitch, I'd rather have my own room control and instead of going to his room. So I had it all set up. And when he came to, so that's why I flew down there, was specifically to get this opportunity. And that's when I pitched the ideas. They were from specifically wanting to have, not so much that I thought the ideas were that great or Bop It was that great. It was just one of many ideas. It was wanting to have a relationship with that person who I really respected. He had discovered Nerf and Twister, I believe, or was instrumental in them. He had a great eye. Every time I heard him talk, I liked how he talked about games. I trusted his judgment. So I think the important part of the story is find out who you could have as a champion that you really respect in a company, and that's who you want to pitch to.
Mhm. And with someone that you respected so much, like Bill, how did it
because I respected him so much, and because I was really hoping something would click, and it wasn't, again, it was one of many things that I had. And he just was so thoughtful. He looked at it, and it was the way he said it, we're not doing games like this right now. And my gut feeling was, okay, they're not going to do, he's not interested. He goes, but we should be. And that is the lesson, I think. To me, it was knowing it was someone high enough up in the process of decision making that they could have, they're the ones, that's the gatekeeper that sort of says, I think we should bring this in to look at. Versus if it was someone working for him, all they have is a list of things we're looking for. We're looking for this. And they might have said, no, we're not looking for things in that category right now. End of meeting. End of that. What else do you have? Because they're doing board games and whatever. And so it was important to have just the luck of the right person at the right time, with the right idea, with the right, all those things have to line up. So how I feel about it was I feel very lucky that the right guy saw it at the right time.
And then can you talk to me a little bit about the production of the Bop It, and specifically around the concept of restrictions breeding creativity? Because from my understanding, on the original chip for the Bop It, you had 6 seconds of audio and you'd filled 5.5, and you didn't know what to do with the last half second. And it was with that last half second that yourself and the team discovered a pivotal line to add that changed the trajectory of Bop It.
It is. It's actually a part of it so interestingly, in my original video, my original one where I'm bopping the hammer and have a video, it's very, it says you do this, then you pass it to the next player, and it's their turn. And the whole idea of it speeding up, and the whole idea of the sound, the creating the rhythm, like everything is there, but it doesn't mean it's the final execution. And the process of pitching an idea to a company and then having other designers work on it, a lot of that, sometimes it goes off in a whole nother vision. But luckily there was a guy there, Bob Welch, who was an amazing designer. He was in charge of sort of executing the concept. And a few other designers, when they were the ones looking at what should we do with this other half second. And because there was only 6 seconds, it wasn't like you could put everything you wanted in there. And one of them, and I believe the guy's name is Jim Tingley, from what I've heard on stories, he's the one that said, well, we should put in pass it. Why don't we put in pass it? Because there was enough audio for it. Now, I could say from an invention, well, I told you should put pass it in there from the beginning. But the people making the final decision, if there either wasn't enough time for pass it, or maybe if there was too much time and they were busy making a bunch of songs to go in and nobody ever remembered, hey, what about the pass it thing? I think it's a little bit on saying that sometimes in the process, having a limitation made it was like, oh yeah, what about pass it? It's only a half second of audio, so we should put it in there. So there's a lot of, serendipity that went into how that happened, with a lot of people making, the right decision at the right time.
Mm. And you mentioned Bob Welch as one of the other designers on. There's a couple other names I want to throw at you and just kind of hear their impact on the success of Bop It. And the first one is Kurt Malstead.
Kurt Malstead was the designer for Bop It Extreme. He was the one that, so Bop It Extreme, after Bop It was a success, I was called by Bill and a guy named Gary Bergman, who both worked at, in the marketing area and design. And they said, this Bop It thing looks like it's going to take off. We should come up with what can we follow it up with? And I thought, well, I've had some ideas all year about more. You don't just have to bop it, twist it, pull it. You can do a lot more with it. And as much as that seems obvious now, at the time it could have gone a lot of different ways. But it was sort of this vision. I even have the sketches here of these were initially, there was a bunch of ideas of this crazy weird thing. This one had grab it and flip it and scratch it, shift it, poke it. Honestly, these are things from 1997, 1988. And still today, like probably yesterday, when I'm on social media, people are like, hey, have you ever thought of scratch it? Or have you, like, people, it's a pretty easy thing to think of things to do an it to, you know. And to be honest, the very first ideas were 5 things that aren't in the original Bop It. Let's not put a twist and a pull. Let's do 5 original things. But later, I had some other sketches that these are ones that I'd sent in. This is before Kurt got to it, you know, that were, you know, should it be more like a steering wheel thing? Should it be, here's one with a flick it, a spin it, squeeze it, and actually a trigger, fire it. Because I thought, well, maybe you hold it in your hand like this, and there's a trigger that you have to squeeze. And then this was the bigger version, you know, with where you can start to see. So the spin it and the flick it and the twist it and the pull it were all sort of in some of the original ideas. And what Kurt did was he took it and turned it into this really cool design. Again, you know, it's pretty much, you can see the elements of it, but it took a great designer to sort of come up with this other shape, which was even more ergonomic, that you could hold it here and still have all these things work. So he was behind that. And of course, that was the idea of Bop It Extreme. As you saw some of the names here, I think I called it Mega Bop It, called it Super Bop It, and I believe, oh, here's the sketch here. This was the other one. I called it Extreme Bop It. This was good. Super Mondo Mega Ultra Mutant Bop It Challenge. So that's a mouthful. I think it's just saying there's a lot of different ideas around this idea of an extreme Bop It for more money with a bigger experience. And that's probably the main thing I tried to say is to them is don't go like cheaper and let it go bigger, because if you have more to do, you can charge more. Like it's very obviously a bigger, more extreme version, versus a lot of products are hard to expand. Bop It seemed like a very expandable idea. So Kurt took it and did the design, the final, like what Bob did on the original one, Kurt did on the Bop It Extreme.
Speaking of making it bigger, how close were we to getting Bop It Pinball?
Oh, the sketch you saw? Look, the pyramid of Bop It concepts to Bop It, you know, but that have been that I've come up with and that have brainstormed over 25 years, it's probably 100 to 1 on the ones that have came to the surface, you know, and been made, because you can only do so much. And things like a Bop It pinball game those are things that get licensed out. Like a pinball company has to be interested enough to do it. Had many talks with arcade companies about doing a Bop It arcade game. I have sketches and concepts and treatments. It's just hard, you know, to get people to get, those companies have to really decide that it's where they're going to bet on. So I don't know how close we are. It's as close as some pinball companies saying I want to do it, and then they figuring out a way to do it with them. Yeah, but I'm going to start posting over this next year a lot of the concepts that never made it, like the pinball and the arcades, and just tons of, you know, boppity things that just never came to market.
And interestingly enough, too, correct me if I'm wrong, but when Bop It first launched, there wasn't this expectation of it to be this toy that was going to last decades. Like from my understanding, you were told it was only going to last like 3 yeers, right?
Yeah, they said no game lasts more than 2 to 3 years anymore. They said, you know, that's the old days. The old days, those days are gone.
And so what made Bop It different?
I don't know. I know my theories are I think for anything to become evergreen or a classic, it has to have a few things going for it. One, it has to occupy a space that's just never been occupied before. You know, it's like my analogy is it's like discovering new land for an explorer. Being an inventor, coming up with a new idea. And if you think about explorers, you know, they're like, hey, no one's ever seen the Amazon before from Western world, or whatever the discovery is, or no one's ever gone this far below sea level, or what are new discoveries are new because they just didn't exist before. They weren't part of human consciousness of that, you know, set of people. So when you think about new inventions, that are, and then that person gets, I guess the analogy is that explorer gets named, you're the discoverer of blank, even though it already existed. I feel inventions are a little bit the same. You have to almost think like they already existed somewhere. They're in the zeitgeist. These things that we kind of all, and then there's someone who discovers it and brings it to the awareness. And that's where a lot of people go, oh, wow, that's a good idea. It sort of was there in some background form, I believe. And that it sort of strikes a nerve that people understand, but that you've discovered it. It's a new thing that's just sitting there that it wasn't discovered before. There was nothing quite like it. And it has to be, of course, simple, usually. A classic thing is usually simple, universal. Bop It it tells you what to do and you do it. There's the name of the game is Bop It. The Bop It is what you do to it. And on every single turn, it gives you the instructions for the game. You're not reading a giant booklet. You're not doing anything. It's like, turn it on and the game is the instructions. So those are reasons why Bop It specifically has become classic. But I believe in general, I suppose I could say the same about this. It's sort of, maybe there were shovels that were sort of like it. It kind of became a classic because it really wasn't brought into form before. Twister, games like that, those clearly seem iconic to me. Games like Candyland, people say it's a classic. Well, I'm sure there were games that involved candy before in some form, but somehow the right timing, these games become classic because they strike a nerve, and then if they're like as what's happened with Bop It, if they make it past 25 years, then the next generation starts, recycling them to their kids, and that's what really makes them classics.
You said the right timing there, and I was wondering if you could explain your acronym RITE, RITE, as it applies to in terms of timing and pitching toys.
Sure, I'll try to do the short version. It's just because there's so much there that I've learned from it over the years. RITE is the concept that for anyone pitching an idea, whether it's a toy invention or just something you want to, sell into someone else, even if you're at work and you have this project or concept you're trying to sell in, no idea can really happen until everything is right. And it's really a way for you to reflect on, to ask yourself whether the idea is ready for you to kind of push hard on. It doesn't, because people think that I have a great idea. I have $1 million idea. And my answer, by the way, usually is, I don't think $1 million is going to cover it. You need about 2 million to launch a really good idea. They of course are thinking how much money they're going to make. They're not thinking about how much money you have to spend. So, but when people focus on the idea only, they're forgetting that that's a very small part of how something succeeds. And RITE is the acronym saying, before you have an idea, you have 3 other things that I find essential. And so RITE are 4 legs of a table, RITE. We know that the idea is one of the legs. Here, I'll demonstrate. Here's this on a table. And there's a leg down here, and this is the idea. Let's say it's a pretty good sized leg. You think it's a pretty good idea. Well, if there's no other legs to this table, it's just going to fall over. So the R over here is relationships. As we just went through the story of Bill Dorman and all these things, that was relationships built over, some failures, some work, a few years, to the point where I had a relationship with the right person at the right time to pitch them the right idea. So the idea needed to be married with the right relationship. But that would fall this way, right, if it didn't have 2 other things. One being the timing. Okay, so this leg is a T. That's timing. How was it the right time? Obviously, in hindsight, you can always say perfect timing. How do you know ahead of time? And my feeling is that's based on you relentlessly asking questions, listening. There's a lot of things in the environment. They're not just your relationships that tell you, hey, is it the right time to pitch this idea? It's your awareness and knowledge of the market, of trends. You're in a lot more control of timing than people think. When they say lucky timing, people who really, really study their field, or the field they're going to pitch something into, will be much more like, there were 3 ideas just like that last year. Bad timing for it now, or many times you'll pitch an idea to a company and they go, we got, we don't want to do monkeys anymore because monkeys were bad last year. There'll be something that you should know before you pitch an idea. So those 3 things have to be strong. And the fourth one is this leg over here, let's say, or this one, is execution. So execution is a thing that stands to me for, you had the right idea, the right relationships, the timing was perfect. You pitched this hammer idea, whatever it was, but there was something just a little off. Perhaps it was that the game, like if Bop It never sped up, by the way, the game is so boring, you stop playing it in 2 minutes. So the execution are little details, things that it feels like the same idea, but is it really, until those details are very important details, again, from listening and adding. Think of the game Simon, which is a memory game. That pattern game doesn't ever speed up. It's just red, red, blue, green, red, blue, green, yellow. It's a challenge on, can you remember the pattern? That's what I thought Bop It was going to be originally. But it was the insight that if it was one move at a time, that's too easy unless it speeds up. And that's why the game totally worked from that one detail. Seems obvious in hindsight, but how do we know? So how you know is you have to be paying attention to, I love this idea. I have the right person to pitch it to. The timing's perfect, and it is perfect. But you kind of have to stop and say, visualize your table and decide, of those 4 legs, what could you do to make each of them even taller and taller and taller, right? So that your idea is on the tallest possible table before you pitch it. So I see it as, it just means look at it and take an honest look and decide, have I executed? Is there something else about this that needs to be better? There's no magical formula that, like, this will make you invent something great, but it will make you focus on each element by itself. Am I pitching this to the right person? Is the R in my table much better with that company than this company? Is the timing better with here? All those things. It's just you kind of visualizing this thing until you feel that the table is strong, tall, evenly supported. It's really just that visualization, nothing more magic about it than forcing you to think that way. So hopefully that's a short enough explanation of what RITE.
Yeah, no, I love the concept. I love the acronym. And from my understanding too, like, you developed the RIT acronym in about 2 hours before you gave a talk at a school, right?
Yeah, I wanted to sound like I knew what I was talking about. So it was design students, and I was supposed to speak about that something. And I came up with, how do you know when your design is right or your invention is right? And was kind of what I thought the topic of the talk was. And I thought, well, why don't I come up with an acronym for right, without any idea what it would mean? And I kind of did what I just did for you, thought about it, and it just seemed to work. I'm sure there's probably 4 other words that could have worked almost as well. Who knows? But it's the fact that you ask yourself, and you're introspective, you ask yourself those 4 questions about your product, rather than just blindly believing that you're right without questioning yourself.
I mean, clearly Bop It had all 4 legs of the table. And I'm curious, with the success that Bop It had, especially initially, how did that impact the trajectory of the rest of your career? Did it almost make it, every time you went to pitch someone, where they just want you to create the next Bop It or the next iteration of the Bop It? Or was it so successful and the royalties were so great that it almost gave you the freedom and the flexibility to pursue other ideas kind of at your own pace and whatever you wanted to do?
Well, it did a lot of those things. Although I didn't know at the time it was going to keep going. So first of all, it was a relief to have something succeed. And besides the money, I'm out there pitching these things, not knowing if I'm just wasting my time. It's just super reassuring to have, even for 1 year of success, to know that and just the thrill of creating something that people love to play. It's financial, but seriously, for anyone I know who talks about inventing, the biggest thrill is finding out that all these people love it. It's like performing on a theater or getting applause. You do it for the connection and the applause. And like I said, for my feeling of having loved games as a kid growing up. So that was the one thing that keeps you going, is this is fun, this is great, it worked, this is possible. I heard you could do this, and until it really starts succeeding, it seems like a myth. So that was encouraging. And then after a couple years, seeing that it looked like it was going to last more than 3 years. But during those 3 years, I was like, had no assumption that it would. So I'm working very, very hard every day during that time, and still am, coming up with new things to pitch to new toy companies. So I still, at the time, had my industrial design clients. I did not quit my day job. I probably continued to have clients for, several years, because I was afraid to stop doing consulting work, because you never know, if royalties shut off, they're off and you get zero. There's nothing you can do about it. It's not my decision to drop a product, it's the toy companies. So many ideas don't last very long. Many of them make no money at all. So as Bop It started to become successful and I could count on some cash flow, it allowed me to stop doing the consulting work, which I missed. I really loved doing it, to be honest, the industrial design work. I just didn't have time. So it allowed me to take more chances, take some of the royalties, invest it back into hiring some people to help, model makers, so that, and eventually ended up with partners so that we could do this very full-time and very as professionally as possible. So it gave me the freedom, it gave me the encouragement, it gave me the relationships. And did people say, do another Bop It? No, not at all, really. Toy companies are like I said, that space is filled. They might think of KID as Kid Group as an interactive design group, because we're very good at interaction. This is probably one of the ones I'm most proud of, this Simon Air, which is a very, this is one where you play the game of Simon, ironically, after all of the thought of Bop It and Simon being compared. But this one, you use hand gestures to play it. And there's so much more in this game. It allows two people to play face to face at the same time. It takes the game of Simon and completely brings it into even when I talk about animating people and making them move, that does to Simon, pretty much, what that's what's so thrilling about it, is discovering this new way to play with the brand. And it was very satisfying after all the years of people comparing Bop It and Simon to say, no, but I have an idea of how to make Simon even better. So that's the way it works, is you're expected to come up with something incredibly innovative for every company that isn't like anything else you've ever done before.
Which you did, though, because I believe it was early 2000s is when you would have launched Perplexus. And before we get there, though, I'm curious, this is just almost like a personal question, but did you have a software company for a little bit in the late 90s?
It wasn't a company. There was a thing called Kigo, which was a concept of taking a USB key. Mm-hmm. It was through a technology that we'd sort of seen, and I had this idea that, what if you could do a thing for kids content? Because at the time, the idea of having web content that was dangerous for kids, and kids want to use the computer, but all the ideas of parent blocking and all that. And there was the idea of taking these keys that you plug into your USB that unlock and launch content, so that you could have live content but you sell it to kids as, this is Elmo games, instead of selling them cartridges, the idea that you plug it in and it becomes content that parents could trust was in a walled garden. And patented, spent a lot of money, developed it, got pretty far. trying to do something outside the toy industry. We're not successful with that, but did do a game system for Hasbro based on that, a plug and play game system called NetJet that didn't do that well. Did a product for Fisher Price that was pretty much that. It was like a web browsing, God, I don't remember what it was called, but it was something where you'd put a character, you plug in a character and it would go to that character's content or a premium experience. And did a thing actually with Frogger, and like there was content that was tried with this platform. So it wasn't really a company. It was a company that we made it a separate company so that if it was to be acquired, we could sell it and not sell our toy invention business. But me and my partners did it and invested a lot in it, and it, probably broke even, but never got the big. Actually, Disney was, going to acquire it. There was a lot of excitement in the .com era, but it didn't. It did what it did, and we ended up moving on.
But did you work on Star Wars Millennium Falcon?
The you mean the Keytop toys?
I found it was like 98 Star Wars Millennium Falcon CD-ROM playset.
Yes, that's a different thing than Kigo. Kigo were internet USB keys. I talked much at all about that Keytop toys, or PC playsets they're called. Well, I don't have any here to do the visual, but they were the concept. So of the same year as Bop It, animate the people. What can you do to make kids move? I had a concept for, at the time there was the PC. If you think about it, in 1995, there was, kind of a clunky thing, and how you would interact with a computer. There was a Barney by Microsoft. There was a few things that were starting to come out that you plugged into your computer, and they were like, oh, it's like a robot or a thing. A lot of toys, and it was kind of clunky, and not a lot of hype about these things, but nothing had succeeded. And I had this idea with who later became my partner, Gary Levenberg, who was doing some software design, of making interactive playsets where they were, again, very physical, where you would have to move things around physically. This is way before the Wii and all that stuff, and have something on the screen react or move. So the idea of Keytop toys the first one was this workshop with a drill press and a sander and a saw. And the idea was, on the screen, the software interaction was, it would say, what do you want to build today? And it would show, like, you pick a thing, like, oh, I want to build a doghouse. So then it would say, great, first cut the wood in half. And so it shows a picture of a saw, and the kid would take the plastic. I'm going to use this as a prop. There was a saw on this play set that you sawed. And when you sawed the saw on the screen would saw and cut the wood in half. So it was something that I tested on my kids, who were 3 years old, 2 years old at the time. And it worked. It told them, now, sand the sander. Does it sound familiar? It's basically a Bop It, use the saw, use the sander, drill the drill press. But you could do it as many times as you want, and screws would go in, and before your eyes, this thing would get built. It wasn't like dragging a mouse, and it was really just do the physical action. And kids loved it. They loved the mock-ups we did, pitched it to Hasbro, and at Hasbro Interactive at the time, the same guy who said maybe it's not a toy, maybe it's not a remote, that guy, Tom Dusenberry, was the one who liked this concept. And it was the fact that you couldn't plug things into a computer very easily. Serial ports, maybe there was a USB, but it was clunky. So it was that we took this idea that seemed crazy and put these pieces of plastic over the top of the keyboard, so that when you sawed the saw, a cam would push down on, like, the J key. And when you did the sander, it would push on the M key. So all the software the CD-ROM had to know was the J key was going click, 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 and it made the saw move back and forth, or whatever. But of course the user experience was that they were physically moving things that literally, and it worked. Almost every keyboard was compatible with it. like we were so surprised. And to Tom's credit, taking the chance to launch this line, there was a Tonka workshop. It was branded with the Tonka brand. There was an easy bake oven, same thing. You could bake and cook things with it. And there was a Millennium Falcon, which was an interactive CD. You have to have Windows 95 to run this today if you want to run it. You know, it's a shame we can't even run it anymore. But it had, the best thing was when you pulled the hyperdrive back, you know, it clicked on the L key, but you didn't know that. You pull it back on the playset, and of course you launched into hyperspace, which was very exciting. So that whole thing was the same, came out the same year as Bop It, 1997. And it was this thing called PC Playsets, which went on to have several, for a few years, it was the best-selling kind of PC game for kids. So that, both of those things in 1997 were the right time, the right person, you know, all about physical action in the digital age, where things were much more, you know, if you think about the timing for those, they were taking digital experience and making them physical.
No, I saw that somewhere and I was like, I just have to ask about this because I haven't heard anybody ask you about the Millennium Falcon game. But talk to me a little bit more about Perplexus and had the idea for that. Because from my understanding, it was through a connection that you eventually ended up making Perplexus, right?
Yeah. The genius behind it is Michael McGinnis. He's a great friend and incredibly talented guy. He's a teacher at Santa Rosa Community College. He was basically someone who worked for me. I think it was his sister who had him as a teacher, and somehow mentioned that her brother worked, you know, for this toy invention group. And he said, "Oh, I've had this idea since I was in high school for this maze, this idea." And it was, so I agreed. I often don't do this because takes a lot of time. I don't like people to pitch me their ideas that often because I'm so busy with my own that it just takes bandwidth away, and I'd rather just give them some advice and let them find their own path. But I agreed to do it because I talked on the phone. He sounded like a really nice guy. And he brought in these, like a little cube with balsa wood mazes that were, I think, called impossible mazes. And they were these things where you had to balance a BB on top of this thing. And I'd say, well, I've seen mazes before. There's been a lot of these little mazes you get at a store. They're teeny. But he turned it, and I could see that when you turned it, the ball it was more three-dimensional than a regular maze. And I thought, you know, there's something here. And if you're interested, I could tell you what I would do with it, how to make it much more playful and easier and iconic, and maybe make it round and make, you know, so kind of like the idea of taking this concept. And I loved that it was physical. I loved that when he turned it, it made him move. So it's that same thing of it animated the player differently than a flat experience. If you look at the commonality of all these things are remotes were flat, made them three-dimensional, right? The keyboard was flat, made it three-dimensional. The Simon was flat, made it, like, all I'm doing is the same thing over and over. So in this case, it was taking a thing that used to be flat, like those mazes, those marble mazes where you take the two things, you know, that you've seen forever on a table. They're great things, but they're pretty much flat. I like that it turned it three-dimensional and it made the user move. When he did it, I was watching him move. So thought about how to take that and how could this really be made into a physical thing to sell and license, and spent a lot of time with him on us kind of creating this new sculptural thing as it's evolved into a non-electronic, obviously, product where when you play with it, if you watch me, right, it's super interactive to watch someone play it. It's interactive to leave it on a table. It's very sculptural. And as it started to take off, which took a number of years, it failed, brought it back with another company. There's a whole story there because it was a beautiful product. And what we did was we made it more beautiful. It looked like this multicolored thing originally. And if you've seen Epic, Perplexus Epic, it's like a thing from the Museum of Modern Art. It's a really beautiful incredibly complex product. And the whole idea in the originally for that was how to make something that was kind of like a flagship thing, $30 more expensive, wouldn't sell that many, but it would set the brand as being this really beautiful thing rather than a cheap toy. And what happened was it was so successful that it outsold the cheaper one, kind of through the industrial design of it being this really sculptural thing. We included a stand that would go with it so that it had a place to put it on your table and leave it out. So those were things that I think from an industrial design perspective, most of the successes that I like that we've had as Kid Group and with collaborations, if you think about it, have all been, very industrial design in nature. A lot of these things are beautiful, are hopefully for a toy, they're nice things. They're not just we don't do dolls and things like that. We're not that kind of a group.
I wanted to ask about one other toy, another one of your award-winning toys, the Hyper Dash. That was another successful one for you as well, right?
Hyper Dash is the game. Again, this was pre-Bop It. Hyper Dash was the game that existed before Bop It as a concept. Can't remember the name of it. Zap Ball. It's called Zap Ball. I have the sketch of it somewhere. It was a ball, kind of like a sport, and it was the opposite in a way. You had these cups like this, and you had this ball, and it would tell you things like red or yellow. And if you put these around your yard, the idea was that it was a game that could get as big as your space. It was the idea of a game that gave you directions and make kids move. Similar premise before Bop It. And this concept is you take the ball and slam it into, I don't know, find it here. Finding a mock-up. So you take this ball that was talking to you and says red, and you'd have to slam it into red, and then the next person was going to come and take it, and they had to put it into yellow as the ball talked to you and told you what to do. Or you could throw the ball to the next person. It was this very interactive idea. It eventually evolved into something where you had to put stickers around the house and have an RFID reader on it so that you could run around and kind of make your own maze or make your own game. Actually was licensed. So this is years later. It was I created it probably in 1995, a couple years before, around the time of Bop It. And that game eventually was dropped. I pitched it to all these companies. Even though they knew I'd done Bop It, you'd think, hey, this is another game. So it didn't really matter that Bop It was so successful. It's so funny how certain, in the eye of the beholder, companies were like, no, it's not really a game. They always have reasons, which is so funny to me. Often people talk themselves out of an idea that's newer than, like, versus a guy that says we're not doing this kind of an idea, but we should. This was more people saying we that's too strange. We don't do that kind of an idea. So not until there was a company called Wild Planet, which was a very local company in that literally 2 blocks from my office in San Francisco. And I liked the founder, Danny Grossman. I pitched him ideas before. They never really did anything, licensed anything, but we had lunch once a year just to stay connected. And one day we're having lunch and he says, why don't we do anything? Why can't we find some project to license and do it? I said, you guys really don't. You do science-y things and spy gear, and they did this whole other type of stuff. I said, I do games, and it's okay. You guys just don't do games. He goes, well, if you had something, what do you think we would do if we did a game? I go, well, there's just one game that everybody's passed on that I think is amazing. It gets kids active. It fits your brand. I don't know. And I told him about it. I literally ran upstairs. We were having lunch at a Chinese place near the house. I ran up and got it, brought it down. He goes, I like this. Let's take a look at it. So I thought, oh, they'll never do this. And after a while, one of the things is I had this idea to change it into this concept of a cup rather than a ball that you push down and it would recognize these cups basically because they have a different ridge pattern on them. And this had buttons in it to know, what it was, kind of like the Key Top toy thing. So this this game, mocked it up. It dropped a piece. It and the idea that it had five, you could make the game as small or as big as you want, big as you are. He decided to do it with his audience, put it out there, and it was a super hit for him. Like, it changed their company because they weren't in games. This was a new game that no one else would do. It was a game that was kind of a message that it was good for kids. Moms and dads liked it. It got their kids up and active. It did some record. It was right when Amazon was starting to sell toys, and it set some record for them of the most, toys sold in some period of time, largely because a bunch of bloggers, parents, moms, dads, bloggers would blog about this game. Nothing's like this out there that makes your kids get up and run and move. So it was very satisfying, to have a game succeed based on the same concept of getting kids to move, but another variation on it. And, again, it's a lesson in maybe that was the right time, even though it could have come out 10 years earlier. The right company, the right guy, the right relationship, the right idea. Again and again, that's easy to look in hindsight, hard to predict when that's going to happen, but it's awfully fun when it does.
And so I'm curious how you handle rejection, because I saw somewhere that you mentioned how it had been years that you had the idea for Hyper Dash before it finally got accepted by a company. And I saw these numbers. You can correct them if they're incorrect, but you've had over 3,800 attempts at licensing toys with just over 300 licensed toys. So about a 10% success rate. Is that about accurate?
Yeah. Most inventors are about there. I think it's about average.
So that means 9 out of 10 times you're hearing no. So what is your advice to people for handling rejection?
Well, it's first of all, I question if I should be called a toy or game inventor. I said, actually, I should be called an idea, a rejection acceptance specialist, because I am, by statistics, I'm statistically 10 times better at accepting rejection than I am at pitching a successful product. But the secret to that, joke is that I actually am good at it. I'm good at taking rejection, and I'm good at inventing things, and I'm good at accepting rejection, because that failure, it's a matchmaking game. If a different company had taken Bop It or taken Hyper Dash, almost for sure it would not have been as successful. I believe, certain games need the right match. Some maybe not, but many of them have to find the right match. So you don't want to feel discouraged just because 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 companies say, I don't get it. Find the company that does get it. But along the way, relentlessly listen to those comments, because you're not wasting your time. You're getting these are experts in the industry. These are, everyone's got an opinion, but you're gathering information by their feedback, and you want to keep prying them. You don't want to spend your time convincing them that your idea is better than they think it is. That's just not going to get you anywhere. Maybe you'll say, hey, can we look at it from another perspective? Or what if those are okay to pitch, they reject it, and you go, really? Well, I think our visions are a little off. I think it's more of this kind of vision. Like, here's how the commercial could go. You might have a way to sort of turn someone, they go, oh, I see that. But often all you're doing is having them feel like, oh God, this guy's trying to sell me something I don't want. So the better thing is to ask them questions. Well, so what would you do with this? What do you think? Either they say, I don't know, or they might have an idea, like maybe it's not a remote. That process of being rejected is some of the most valuable information you'll ever get. And so having the relationships to be able to meet with enough people to take your idea so that you can get the right timing, and that RITE is really a map of saying that rejection is the process. And often you'll hear something in one meeting that is the key that was missing in your product, that if you're listening for it, maybe that's, and I believe same thing, Hyper Dash, all these were little bits along the way changed until the right opportunity came up.
Jumping a little bit here, and it's a bit of a two-pronged question. Can you kind of talk to me about, 1, the support of your wife over the course of your career, and 2, illustratedtravels.com?
Well, Alicia, my wife, is amazingly supportive, and more as much as we both like games and like to play games a lot, and board games that people come over, and not usually never a game that I've invented. We're talking, I like a lot of the really cool, uh, or a little more deeper strategy games, or just any game that makes people interactive, and always new games. I'm always playing different things to kind of understand different games. And she's very much, we really connect on that level. So when we go to a game fair together, like in Essen, Germany, we'll spend 4 days playing everything possible. But also she's uh, really understands the business well, because she'll be in all the pitch meetings with me, and she's very organized and is the side of sort of really bouncing ideas off of. She really gets a different perspective, but also has the patience to listen to all these thoughts and kind of give me an honest feedback. So that's the role there. But also, as we've been starting bopitforgood.com, which is basically me wanting to give back for all the success for Bop It, is that she's heading that up in terms of her ability to run organizations she's done in the past that are not-for-profit organizations. Our goal is to help give back, raise money with certain products that are going to help children's charities that focus on the arts and design and creativity. Advantages that I had that I'd like to give to others. And so this year, as the 25th anniversary for Bop It, we're working on that, and she's doing a lot to make that happen.
That's awesome. Another question on illustratedtravels.com.
That's something I thought I would be doing more with this year, but it's Illustrated Travels is my hobby, is drawing still and illustrating with watercolor sketchbooks that I've always drawn, and sketched my whole life. And I found I wasn't doing enough of it as I started to build models and do a lot more things in the toy industry. So I decided one day to start drawing people on the ferry and sketching. And then when we'd go on these trips as a family, I would start to illustrate our travels and, little funny notes and inside jokes and whatever, and then do them as a watercolor journal and print them out, make them into these books. So the thought of Illustrated Travels, on one hand, is just our own personal stuff, but then my dream of it was to retire from toy inventing and get hired as an illustrated travel journalist to illustrate other people. Go on some fun, fantastic trip that someone would bring me and my wife on, and we'll draw and illustrate this adventure for you. That might happen in the future, but right now I'm just too busy. So it has flurries of activity, and then it goes away. But the idea that combining my hobby with something like that would be wonderful.
That's amazing. I just wanted to share that with everyone listening, because I found that in my research. I thought it was really cool. But I know we're out of time here, so I have two quick questions left. The first one is, Bop It has sold over 30 million units at this point. You've had multiple toys of the year. How often do you take the time to reflect on everything you've accomplished over the course of your career?
I think this is the year I'm finally doing that. That's why I'm reflecting, and look, there's been plenty of flops, plenty of mistakes, but on the other hand, I've had some great luck, worked very hard, loved it, but I'm trying to sort of actually haven't talked about this a lot, is this year, if we can get it together, writing basically the brief history of Bop It book, with an author who did the Mojo Nation article on me, trying to gather the story, basically giving credit to everyone who was involved. Now that we know that it's succeeded after 25 years, there's a lot of stories there, to the fans that have played it, to the celebrities, to there's so much pop culture that Bop It has created, and then marrying that with just other experiences and the fun of inventing toys into a hopefully relatively short book that is documented, drawings. That a lot of the stuff on social media is sort of the gathering of that information and celebrating somehow surviving 25 years and enjoying it and meeting an amazing group of peers and people that I want to do something. So that's a big looking back experience for me.
That's amazing. You have to keep me posted. I'm interested in reading that book. But my final question, I like to flip the script a little bit. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. So pretend you have a crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question. You'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you'd want to know the answer to?
I think it's my gut feeling about it. The honest answer is, yeah, I guess it's back to what I said, what's your favorite golden memory? If everyone could tell me, if they could pop out, what is our games, if I was to lead the question, it would be, is playing games the one of the most cherished sort of memory experiences that people have? I'd love to know from everyone, is that just my experience? Is that more universal? Is the feeling of play? So I don't know how to form it in a perfect question, but I do have curiosity about that because it was so meaningful to me that games connected me with people. So I guess I want to know, what's your most connected experience? And if it's a game, it'll just kind of help me continue my my feeling of having a purpose.
Oh, I love that. I always love when it's a new question that people want to ask, because you get the same ones where what happens when we die, what should I do with my life? But I always enjoy when it's a new question that people are asking. But I want to thank you so much for taking time to be on this podcast. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you've got right now.
Well, depends what if you want to see me embarrassing myself a lot, you can go to TikTok, and it's me trying, like I said, to put stories together, experiment with a thing. I wasn't even on social media before this year at all, not even Facebook. So this is me trying to reach out to fans, hear what they think, hear their experiences, ideas, on at Bop It Inventor. Both Instagram and TikTok are the same handle. Same, I believe, on Twitter at Bop It Inventor. And, I'm interested in stories. I mean, things I might put in the book, what's someone's Bop It experience, game, anything that, that Bop It or inventing related. Don't know that I can answer that many things because it's getting very busy, but I love seeing it. Love it when people post videos. I try to do, call outs and stuff. So I'm looking at I'm on social media for the whole Bop It experience, and invention experience, and just celebrating 25 years with fans. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, make sure it's linked in the show notes down below so everyone can find it.
Thank you, Jacob. You ask amazing questions. You're an amazing interviewer. I really appreciate it. It's one of my favorite interviews.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That means a lot. I try to make sure I'm as prepared as possible coming in these interviews. So knowing that you noticed, it's appreciated.
You've set the standard.
Thank you. I hope I said it pretty high. I appreciate that. But I want to thank you once again for taking time to be on this podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening. Whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces, I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone do me a big favor. Go and follow Dan. Go and check out at Bop It Inventor on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. Like I said, I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so you can find it. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.